Thanks to my ever-growing need to buy more and more unnecessary amounts of trees for my tabletop role-playing games, I bought another tree, and we're gonna work on it, I think. Let's go. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. My name is Garmin. This, of course, is the Storycraft Society, and this week I have a couple of confessions to make. I'm not actually sure that they're confessions, but they are me telling you all a bunch of truths about myself that I realized when I purchased this kit. Number one, I have never put together a model kit before. Everything I've ever made for the channel, I have either built from scratch or assembled pieces to put together in my own mental puzzle configuration. So I've never actually had the opportunity to put together a pre-made model kit before, so that's gonna be interesting, number one. Number two, I have never put together any Warhammer terrain before. That's something that is totally new to me. And lastly, I've never put together an all-plastic kit before. New is always a good thing. If nothing else, you will learn something, but I also love trees, so that's gonna be another major reason to put these together. They look very visually different from the other trees that I have in my collection. And lastly, because of them being all plastic, I imagine that they will be very, very durable, which will lead to many, many, many years of tabletop gaming. So, with that said, we got the Wyldwood Trees, Wyldwood Trees, got that wrong. I think they actually have rules in here that are made to go with your Warhammer Age of Sigmar armies. But for me, I think that's not necessarily what I need them for. What I need them for is just cool props for my Dungeons and Dragons tables and probably Moonstone and that sort of thing. So, with that said, let's dive into it and start seeing what we got to do with these things. All right, so let's crack this puppy open. So, as we flip open here, what we're going to have is a rule book, or maybe this isn't a rule book, maybe this is put together instructions. Okay, so it tells us how to put these things together. Oh, but then here are actual rules, I guess. Not even gonna read that because it won't make any sense to me. Got a couple different languages there. And then we've got the main show here, which is going to be all of our sprues. We've got a bunch of different tree trunks here, and then oh boy, all of the branches. This is gonna be a lot of branches. They do seem to have a lot of detail though. That's really nice. Yeah, these are very, very detailed, almost to a fault though. We'll see how difficult it is to get them all put together and painted. Next thing is gonna be clipping them off of those sprues. Time lapse, time. Now that we have all of these all clipped out, well, at least the trunks and base parts, we now can get these assembled, and it's actually really neat how they go together. So the trees are hollow like this, and they just set together like that. Once they're glued, it will be a barely visible line. If you wanted to go like that next step up, you could try and fill that crack. That's something that I'm not worried about. You really won't be able to see it from the table, and as long as I do a good enough job painting, I think this seam will end up just looking like one of these deep lines instead of looking like a seam. Like I said, you take those pieces, you put them together, and then they just have these little ball joints that just set right down in, and then same thing over here on the other side. And once you get it glued, there is one of our trees, and the others go together basically the exact same way. Pretty neat. So we haven't even finished clipping our model off of the sprues yet, and I have already hit my first hiccup. Okay, so bear with me as I try to talk my way through this, because I'm still in the process of thinking to figure out what I'm gonna do. So the first issue that I see is that some of these little leafy branchy bits have a ball joint where they will connect to the tree. Those are the easier ones to deal with, at least that I'm seeing right now. The more difficult ones are there's a bunch of these leafy bits that do not have a ball joint. So how do I prime those so I don't get my fingers on them, but still make it easy for me to be able to paint them underneath? I guess I could do it in multiple waves. That would be one option. Another option, well, actually, let me take a step back real quick. The ball joints are easier because what I can do is just clip the sprue away so that it allows me to have a little bit of sprue to hold instead of having to hold the leafy branchy bits. That's easier. For these, maybe I'll just go ahead and attach them to the tree, so the tree will be just the very top tippy leaves, and then I'll keep all of the branches with the ball joints separate. That's an option. Okay, then on to problem number 2. Each of these go to a specific location on the trees. They all have a little number that's associated with them. The problem is that number is on the sprue, it's not on the little leafy bit. So when I get to the point that I'm ready to clip these off, I will lose the number that's associated with the bit. So I think what I'm gonna have to do is make out a little like paper chart to be able to set these on so that I know which one goes with which number. Those are the next 2 things that we're going to do. Let's jump into them. So with all the pieces all cut out and ready to go, the next step is to assemble what I can assemble. So that play is going to be assembling all of the trunks and the bases, and then putting all of the little leafy bits that don't have a stem to hold on to all together. Then we're gonna get everything sprayed up. But the way that we're going to assemble them is going to be with glue, obviously. And I have 2 types of glue here. Now, the kit says specifically that it is supposed to be put together with plastic glue. And of course, Games Workshop says that you need to use their plastic glue. I did buy plastic glue. I don't know what the difference between, I've said plastic glue a lot. I don't know what the difference between plastic glue and super glue is, other than that I can guess that one is made of plastic and the other is made of super. But what I'm gonna do is assemble all of these with the super glue, I guess. We'll see. Maybe I'll get adventurous and try building the last one with plastic glue. But for now, we're gonna go with super glue and get these all put together. Okay, so with all of our pieces assembled up, it was time to get to priming them, which will in turn get us ready for paint. Now the plan for that is going to be a flat coat of Wraithbone primer over the whole thing. Wraithbone is just a color primer from Citadel's contrast line. Not a real reason I'm picking it other than it's going to be a nice warm color that will be a nice base tone for these trees, which will let me use watered down craft paint to paint them, and it will make the highlights shine through really nicely. So let's just jump into that. I think that's the next play. So this is starting to become a reoccurring theme that right in the middle of when I'm doing something, I run out of something. I say it every time, that's how it always goes. In the middle of priming the trees, I ran out of Wraithbone. And actually in all of this, anybody who's a longtime watcher of the channel should know that Olivia, in the middle of priming my trees for me, she was the one who ran out of Wraithbone. So what that means is I need to go out and get more so we can finish priming the trees, right? But I think what this does for me is actually gives me a really great segue into talking about my number one issue with these trees. And just plain and simple, that is the cost. So I think this kit retails for like $50 American. That's a lot for 3 trees. Like, a lot for 3 trees. The detail in them is really, really nice. I think that I can come up with ways to justify the cost, but for me, boy, that is an absolutely wildly expensive set of 3 trees. But that's not where the cost ends. I'm having to go out and buy primer for this. If you were to paint these with contrast paint, I can't imagine how much of a little pot of contrast paint you would use in order to paint these things. I guess this is a really long way of saying this is a fun little treat to get to do this particular project. I think once they're done, they'll look absolutely exceptional on the table. But also with that said, I really think that this is an expensive project for what you're getting out of it. With that said, I'm gonna go to the game store. I'm going to get my Wraithbone primer, and then I'll get back and we'll end up getting the last of the spray priming done. All right, so once they were all primed up, it was time to dive into paint. Now, I'm not going to go in depth to each step that I took to get this result, but I am going to explain each step kind of quickly. And if you have questions or whatever, you can throw them into the comments below. The one thing that I will say is that I am very, very pleased with the result that I got from this paint job. I do not consider myself a master painter by any stretch of the imagination. This might sound like a big statement, but it's something that I'm really proud of. I think I got this fairly close to the box art in terms of quality. I think the colors are different, but as far as quality goes, I got it, to my standard, exceptionally well done. So I'm really, really pleased with that. So now to get things started, I used a very watered down burnt umber over top of all of the wooden bits and the ground. So that's going to be any of the sticks and stuff that are on the ground, the dirt texture itself, and the trunks. One thing that I'll say is I, through this whole process, was not super clean about where my other colors went. There are lots of colors in nature, and I cannot stress this enough. Rocks have brown in them. A lot of the dirt from the ground makes it up onto the rocks. So there's no reason you have to be super tidy here. You're going to be cleaning it up later, but even if that color shows through in other places, it's not a big deal. So the next step was to use an Agrax Earthshade wash over top of all of the things that I just put burnt umber over. This is going to darken the darkest, but it's not going to mess so much with the highest highs. That worked really, really well, and that's actually where I'm going to stop working on the ground. I'm not going to touch that anymore. The way I'm going to differentiate that from the wood texture is I'm then going to highlight all of the woods up. I'm going to start with a territorial beige. That's going to go over all of the wooden bits, so the trunks and all of the sticks that are on the ground. I'm going to do this as a dry brush here, but it's a pretty aggressive dry brush because this is my mid-tone and I want this to show up and be my main visual part of the tree. The next thing that I did was I took a khaki and went over the top. This is a true dry brushing where I'm just trying to grab the edges and the highest points. This is going to give me definition to the bark texture of the trunk as well as the bark texture of the sticks on the ground. Next, I moved on to the base. So I started with the rocks, starting with a pewter gray that I watered way down and went over all of the rocks that I saw, the little ones, the big ones. It's okay if colors underneath shine through here because, like I said, rocks are varied in nature. So having different color variation will be really nice to help them look natural later. Then I took a granite gray and dry brushed those over the top, being careful to try and be as neat as I could with the rocks here, trying my best not to get it onto the ground or wood textures that I had finished painting. But then the next step was to use Basilicanum Gray, which is a contrast paint from Citadel, over top of the rocks again. Now, the reason I chose this over some kind of a wash like, why can't I remember the name of the black wash? Black wash. Nuln Oil. The reason that I used this instead of a wash like Nuln Oil is that I wanted more coverage. It's going to tie all those colors together and make them feel really uniform without obscuring all of my highlights. So with that said, Basilicanum Gray over all of the rocks. Next up was the bones. This was a really fun part of the project, actually, getting these little pops of white color to jump out. I took a watered down antique white and I put that all over all of the bones. Now here is the trick to this. Do not try to paint out all of these bones and make them go right down to the edge of the dirt where every little tiny bit of them was absolutely perfectly painted. That would have driven me nuts. All I did was worry about the high spots and the places where the eye visually catches. All of the areas like the slopes underneath of the skulls, that can be shadowed and it's going to get covered up in our next step anyway. So, moving on to our next step, I used a Skeleton Horde contrast paint. This is kind of like a tannish color with a little bit of yellow in there, I guess. And that's going to go over all of our bones pretty healthily. That's going to tie our transitions in and make them not look like it's just these floating bits of white up on top. That's going to be what we're going to do with the bones. My next move was to move on to the mushrooms, and with that, I planned on using a warm beige. This is like a pinky tan kind of a color, and then I was going to wash over that with Seraphim Sepia. Now that's going to change, but I'll explain that here in a second. So what I did was I took the warm beige, watered it down, and went over all of the mushrooms, doing my best to get a flat, even coat, but if any of those undercolors show through, that is okay. Mushrooms are natural. They have lots of different colors. And then what I did was I went to wash them next. Now here's the thing. I realized right before I went to wash them that I have a lot of browns and warm browns all across these models. So if I would have went with the Seraphim Sepia, it would have probably looked similar to the bones on the ground. It would have looked similar to the khaki that was up onto the tree. So I really wanted something that would visually make these mushrooms step out of the wooden trunk. So I switched it up and I actually went with a Reikland Flesh shade to kind of enhance the pink tones that are in this warm beige. And I'm really happy that I did, because this worked out just absolutely perfect. The mushrooms really stand out in a way that I find very pleasing, but not so stand out that they look like they're trying to jump out and force you to look at them, which is nice. The next thing that I did was I moved on to the leaves, and they're going to take up most of the visual space on this model, so I wanted to make sure that I got it right. I went with 3 different colors. The first one was an English ivy green that I watered way down. I mean, like consistency of almost a wash, and put that all over all of the leaves. That's gonna let the dark part of the paint settle down into the recesses almost like a contrast paint, and then have the tops of the leaves almost look highlit right away. The next thing that I did was a shamrock green, and I dry brushed that over the top. Now, I did not try to hit every single leaf with this. I tried to go in waves and areas to get some green difference in the leaves. So sometimes they're a little bit more English ivy green, and sometimes they're a little bit more shamrock green. It provides more visual interest and a push and pull for the eye. The next thing that I did was do my true final highlight, and I did that in a celery green, which is like a sickly, almost tan color, but I went over top of all the leaves on the tops of the canopies of the trees just to make sure that all of the leaves had a lot of definition. And then on the branches, I just went down over the outside edge so that they look lit from the sun. But with that said, that was all of the painting done, and I am super pumped with how these turned out. Now there is a really fun step, which is going to be gluing all of these branches onto the trees and seeing what they look like all together. I'm really excited. Let's go. Side note, before I start gluing all of these in, I'm actually kind of surprised, but the instructions do not give you a specific way to mount any of the branches. Actually, it just says take 8 of the branches and glue them into the little ball joints. Pretty shocking to me, but I guess the play is going to be, here, I'll turn you over this way. I guess the play is gonna be stick to putting the bigger branches like this on the bottom, and the further you get up to the top, start going with thinner branches. That's what I'm gonna try anyway. Let's jump into it. All right, first branch, here we go. A little bit of super glue on the end here. Place that down in. I think that's it. Sweet. Let's knock the rest of them out. My final step was to glue all of the branches on, and with that done, I am super pleased with how these turned out. But the one thing that I will say, consider this an honest review of putting these wildwood trees together. I think my end result is going to be that as cool as they are when they're finished, the cost and the time investment for me just isn't worth it. My favorite part about making terrain is making terrain. I've said it a million times on the channel, painting is my least favorite part of the process. And with a model kit like this, you're assembling it really quickly, but then the rest of the time is spent doing all of the painting and that sort of thing. So for me, the painting part of it dragged on a long time. And even though the result, I think, turned out spectacular and I couldn't be more pleased, I just can't see myself putting together another one of these kits again. But hey, do it one time, you find out what you like and what you don't like. That's what crafting is all about. And whether I never make these again or not, I still have these 3 that will go onto my shelf and I will be able to use forever in my games. So hopefully you enjoyed watching this as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, definitely leave me a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and share this video with a friend that you think would enjoy it, because that is the #1 fastest way to grow a small YouTube channel. But that's it. That's what I got for this week. Thank you so much for watching, and until next week, I'll be seeing you.